correctly. So we're going to get started with this afternoon's webinar, Call to Action, Addressing Digital Accessibility. We are joined today by Rebecca Peterson, who's an education specialist in college and career readiness for the Utah State Board of Education, who has some really great lessons learned about addressing digital accessibility that she's going to share today. I am Elise Crossland. I'm a senior researcher at American Institutes for Research and work as part of the team on the Center on Technology and Disability. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kristen Rudell, principal researcher, who's also at CTD. Rebecca has put in some accessibility information for several of the slides. We will, after this webinar, send out the recording, captioned recording of the webinar, along with the final slides and some handouts. But she wanted to call people's attention to specific animations in her slides, and that slide 17 contains bright yellow text that is intentionally designed to be inaccessible and difficult to read, and that there's a video activity on slide 11, but there's alternate text and description of the video activity embedded in that text box. So just briefly, we wanted to talk about the Center on Technology and Disability. We are a federally funded center funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. And our goals are to establish a user-centered learning and technical assistance center to increase capacity of families, school systems, TA providers, and state and district leaders, specifically around helping leaders to build understanding and assess, acquire, and implement appropriate assistive and instructional technology strategies and tools. And here at AIR, we specifically focus on trying to help state and district leaders meet those goals. Here you can see what we all look like, so we're not just disembodied voices on the phone. Today, Kristen and I will really kind of focus on setting the stage and answering some questions and leaving most of the time for Rebecca to share the process and steps that they've taken at the Utah State Board of Education to address digital accessibility issues. So very quickly, I'm going to introduce our digital accessibility toolkit that we've put out at CTD in partnership with COSIN. We have a new version of the toolkit that has just come out recently with some updated information as the laws have changed. And then we're going to turn it over to Rebecca to really talk about the practicalities of what they've done at the state level to address these. And then we'll leave some time at the end to talk about next steps and answer any questions that you may have. So here's the cover of our latest version of the Digital Accessibility Toolkit. It covers definitions of digital accessibility, talks about procurement of accessible technology, the benefits of digital accessibility, and specific legal requirements, both at the sort of state and federal level around digital accessibility. And before Rebecca gets started, I just want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page in terms of using consistent definitions. When we're talking about accessible content, we're talking about content that people with disabilities can navigate, perceive, understand, and interact with. And it's content that considers physical, visual, speech, auditory, neurological, and cognitive disabilities. And this has certainly been a hot topic. We know this is why a lot of states and district leaders have been asking these questions, because digital accessibility is the law. And a number of states or districts have received complaints through the Office of Civil Rights or parents who've been unable to access content on a website. And so this question comes up a lot with regard to the legal responsibility to provide accessible content. But digital accessibility is also really essential. It's an essential part of our educational mission. If we're not universally designing our content, then we're not meeting our goals as educators, whether it's in communicating and educating our students or communicating with families and parents and stakeholders in our community. If we're digitally excluding them, then we're failing to meet our mission and obligation in educating our students and helping their families and communities learn and grow. So I mentioned briefly universal design when I said if we're not universally designing things. And when we're talking about universal design, the sort of classic example is always, as you can see in my image here, the curb cuts on a sidewalk. And when we talk about universal design, we mean that all products and the built environment are designed to be usable by everybody, regardless of somebody's ability, age, or status. And there's an understanding when you talk about universal design that making things accessible and inclusive benefits everybody, not just users with disabilities. And it's why this curb cut example is such a nice visual reminder, because we all use curb cuts, whether we're riding a bike or pushing a stroller or wheeling a shopping cart or luggage. They're actually designed to be accessible to people with mobility issues and people in wheelchairs, but it's something that we all benefit from. And here are just some examples of accessibility features that I'm sure most of you use all of these or almost all of these every day. We benefit from closed captioning when we're in the airport or in a doctor's office or somewhere where we want to be able to watch video but can't have sound on. We use touch screens and zooming in. We often use text-to-speech. I use voice recognition constantly on my phone. And so these are all benefits that have started out as accessibility features for people with disabilities, but they're things that we all use every day and we've really benefited from, and they make us more productive, they make our jobs easier, our lives easier. So as Rebecca talks about these things, sort of keep in mind what other benefits would students or families or caregivers or community members receive if all of the content and learning opportunities that they were accessing were designed in a way that were universally accessible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk about how USBE has started taking this process one step at a time, as she says.
Thank you. So I'm excited to be here to talk about some of the things that we've learned and the process that we've gone through, and to be able to share tools, things that we've developed. So our journey kind of began when our IT director realized that our website, our old website, was not compliant with Section 508. Then this led to re-examining the website, led to a proposal put forward by the IT director to the superintendency that this website needed to be redesigned. And at the same time, there was a website for the agency side of the State Board of Education and a website for the actual state board. And so a proposal was made to be able to combine those and other things. And as all of this discussion was happening at the same time, the state received an OCR complaint, which is a perfect tie-in to what Elise was talking about just a few minutes ago, with getting this kind of spurred and moved forward a little bit more quickly. But because we were already in the process of redesigning things, that shortened the review process, and it also made the agreement process a little bit easier because we already had things moving and already had things in place. So this review process was simplified. So from that point, we generated a plan looking at how we could redesign the website, knowing what the requirements were with the OCR agreement, and we started to plan what all of this was going to look like, what training was going to need to be completed, and where we needed to go. And then in June of 2017, the framework for our new website was launched. And we'll talk as we go forward about some of the things that we learned. The plans for this great seamless rollout were not quite as seamless as we had hoped they would be, but we learned some really good things. So with that, that's the history of how this effort kind of came to be and what the impetus was for getting things moving forward. Elise, you want to go to the next slide? So this has become kind of the theme of our efforts up here. It's how do you eat an elephant? So first thing is to educate administration and leadership. So this came about when we were looking at, so why do we need to do this? Why is this important? And why, what is this going to take? What kind of materials, what kind of resources? Because at first glance, the idea of building accessible materials and an accessible website doesn't seem like it might be that difficult to do. But the further we delved into it, the more complicated we realized it actually was, and the more training and time and resources it was going to take. And that required us to be able to educate effectively. From there, we needed to be able to build capacity of all staff. One of the things we quickly learned is that this job was way too big for any, 1, 2, or even 10 people. But that in building capacity of all of the staff to be able to create accessible materials and to then help other people to do the same thing, that it made the job a lot easier. So we created some plans for how to be able to do that. Okay. Then going along with that, we developed reference materials, coaching materials that could be used across all of the different departments at USBE. And with the reference materials, things that people could access anytime. So if somebody was working on a PowerPoint and they were kind of stuck and they weren't quite sure where to go, they at least had a place where they could go find help and they could get questions answered. So that was an important part of what we did. We started out by carrying out overview trainings. So one of the things that we realized was that the scope of all of this was quite large. So it encompassed any kind of communication that might reasonably be expected to occur from our agency to anybody else. So that includes everything that we do. And trying to wrap your mind around that becomes a little bit overwhelming. So we started with overview trainings just to kind of get people's feet wet. And then from there, we moved into more in-depth trainings. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned going through this process as we continue. But we wanted to be sure and give people the information that they needed so that they would be able to, again, have that capacity within their departments to be able to build their materials in an accessible fashion. From that point, the goal has been to reach out to LEAs and to other agencies as we make contact with them to help them to become aware of digital accessibility and of how to be able to do and create and build and really, I guess, change the mindset of something that has traditionally been done one way. As educators, we get pretty good at doing things in ways that work for us quickly, easily, because that's our habit. And so helping LEAs to have a clear path for how do we look at this idea and how do we incorporate it. And so that's an ongoing effort. We're just at the beginning part of that, reaching out to LEAs, but we are making some inroads across the state, which is exciting. Within each section or each department up here at USBE, what we found is that one of the things people needed was somebody that they could go and get expert information from. One of the biggest challenges when we first started was that we didn't know who to ask questions to. So as a matter of fact, that's how we got connected with CTV, was trying to find information on how on earth do we do this. We didn't have the capacity originally built at the state, and so we needed to create it. And in order to create it, we needed to find people who could help us to learn. And so we were busy hunting for experts. And once we were able to build a couple of experts within our state level, we discovered that we needed more because it doesn't work well to only have one or two people for an entire agency to ask questions to. So the goal is to create a go-to team. So one person be the go-to within each department who is primarily responsible for answering questions and learning about digital accessibility. And that really helped to kind of ease the load and also help to create the culture of this is how we do business. This isn't an initiative, this isn't just something that we're doing because it's nice. This is just how we do business. And so having that expert there was somebody who could coach, somebody who could mentor, and so people didn't feel like they were just stuck and they weren't sure what to do. They always had somebody that they could go and ask. And so that became, and is still, that part is still evolving, but that's becoming a very critical part of implementing this on a large scale and scaling these efforts up. So some of the tools that we use, and these are some of the items that we're sharing with you as examples of things that have worked. But we use presentations, we do this in team meetings. So an example of that might be working in special education or in assessment or whatever department. What we've found is that during those team meetings or staff meetings, that's when you have a group of people together kind of in a captive audience. And it's a really convenient time to be able to have a small accessibility training done on a regular basis, so a little tidbit. And during those team meeting trainings, you can build a scaffolded approach to learning about accessibility, learning how to actually build accessible documents, accessible media, how do you close caption items, what are the requirements for meeting accessibility standards. All of those things within team meeting trainings have become really useful. Small group and individual coaching. So sometimes there are groups of people who are focusing on a particular skill or a particular kind of document. For example, fillable forms. Not everybody uses fillable forms, but there's groups of people that create a lot of those particular forms. And so one of the things that we've done is created groups where, hey, we're going to learn about fillable forms. If you want to come on this particular day and this particular time, we're going to work on this. That has also kind of morphed into work groups. What we found is that sometimes people just want to come and work with a group that's also working on the same kind of thing so that they can learn, and if they have questions, they can ask somebody who's right there. So an example of that might be, hey, we're going to work on accessible PowerPoint presentations. If you want to bring a project that you're working on, come join us in room 248. And as you work, if you have questions, there'll be people there who can help you and who can answer your questions. But I want to point out that the goal isn't to have somebody else fixing the accessibility errors or things that might show up, but the goal is to actually teach and coach up the knowledge of the staff and to build the capacity of everybody to be able to create their own accessible material. And doing that by coaching, which when you think about professional development research and what works, it's coaching that in an applied situation that will make the difference in actually applying those things in practice. And so that's what we found made a big difference. As far as creating awareness, and starting to branch out to LEAs. We've done news articles, newsletter articles, when we do different state meetings at the LEA level, we'll have trainings starting at the overview level just to get people to start to think about digital accessibility. And then from there, they can access resources and items that we've created so that they can then turn around and do their own LEA trainings, or they can ask for help and we can help them to be able to build their capacity as well. But our goal is to build scaled up capacity, not to build one or two experts that everybody goes to. As far as ready resources, not everybody is going to be able to attend this group or that training. And so another thing that we've created are resources that anybody can go to at any time. So if you're one of those people who may or may not be me, creating a presentation at 1 o'clock in the morning, and maybe I'm creating that presentation and I get stuck and I am not sure what to do. And I can't call somebody at 1 o'clock in the morning, but I can go to the how-to videos or tutorials or checklists or other items that we have on an intranet page within our agency for accessibility helps and hints and how-tos. And on those items, I could look at, hey, I need to know how to embed a video that has closed captioning, or I need to know how to find a video or make a video with closed captioning. And so there's resources and things available to help people to be able to do those things that they can access whenever they need them. Okay, next. Actually, before you go, you can go back one more, sorry, Elise. I wanted to point out on the color contrast guide, that's one of the items that we shared. And what that guide, kind of how that came about was the question of, well, how do we know if this particular color combination meets color contrast requirements? And the most common question were, if we want to use something with white text or black text, and we're in a Word program or an Office program like Word or PowerPoint or something that has kind of that standard list of colors, how do we know easily if those meet color contrast requirements? And so that color contrast guide is kind of the answer to that question. And what I did when I created that guide is I went through all of the standard colors that are in the little color selection bar in Word documents. And I looked to see, okay, if I was using, for example, the standard red color, would that meet the color contrast requirements if I used it with black text or if I used it with white text? Meaning if I used red text on a white background or red text on a black background, either, would that meet those requirements? And then if it didn't meet those requirements, what color would meet the requirements? And when you look at that document, the color contrast is done to a AAA requirement. The AA is kind of the standard. When it came to color contrast on items, we felt like if we're going to do it, we might as well do it all the way. And so we went with the AAA. And so that's what that document is. So when you look at that, if you want to know quickly, if I want to use a red with black, and you'll notice that there's a box and it's kind of a pinkish color. It's not the red that you might expect, but that's the red that will meet the color contrast requirements to use with black text or a black background. So that's what the color contrast guide is, and that's been something that we've circulated throughout the agency and actually with anybody else outside of our agency that has had questions about color contrast. And then it also has links to WebAIM's color contrast checker as well. Other things that we've done are send out weekly tidbits. So just in little email prompts just to keep it foremost in people's minds as just a handy hint for this week. So here, maybe this week we're focusing on meaningful linked text. Here are 5 steps you can do, and this is how you do it. This is when you would use it. And this is why it matters. And so just sending those out has been a good way to keep accessibility in people's minds on a regular basis. Okay, next slide. So when we're doing trainings, one of the things that one of the questions that came up when we first started doing this was, well, why do we have to do this? Why does this matter? Why? And so to help people get kind of beyond this idea of, okay, this is the thing I'm going to check off because it's a requirement, we found that it was really important to help people understand this from a make it real point of view. So we used the information from the Accessibility is More Than a Checklist, which is a form of the information that was created by CTV. But one of the things that I share is I really want people to personalize this to themselves so that they can understand that accessibility really applies to everybody. So this can go back to some of those examples that Elise shared earlier, but I also share a story about a time when I was in a wheelchair for a couple of months, and I was going to a restaurant with my husband, and this particular restaurant had a wheelchair ramp to be able to get in the door. So you go up the wheelchair ramp and try to open the door. The problem was that the door swung toward the sidewalk, toward where you went to get up onto the sidewalk. So you couldn't get in the door without going past the door, turning around, and then coming back. So even though they met, or going off the curb, which was like a foot tall, which wouldn't have worked very well. So, it's a good example of you can meet the requirement of the law. So the requirement was put in a wheelchair ramp, but it wasn't functional because it didn't allow me to actually go up and open the door. Another example of that was in actually another restaurant where I had gone in to use the restroom, and I tried to leave the restroom, and I couldn't get out because of the way they had placed the garbage can, which didn't allow me to be able to reach the door to be able to get out. So I was stuck sitting in the bathroom until my husband eventually figured out that I wasn't coming out and that he might want to check on me. And so he did, and I was able to eventually leave the bathroom, which was nice. So, those are examples of, that letter of the law was met, but the actual functionality really wasn't there. So trying to get people to go through and really think about, as they're doing the items to make their documents accessible, are the things that they're doing really functional? Are they actually going to work? So as we go through this, some of the things that I do are I use yellow text, I use difficult fonts. You think about, if you know any elementary teachers, not to pick on just elementary teachers, but elementary teachers for some reason tend to like really cute fonts. And as a former biology teacher, I have to admit I had a font that had little, looked like cells, kind of, that could attach to the letters. I loved it. Totally inaccessible. But showing, these are things that as teachers, we like to do these things. And so, but getting people to think about this a little bit differently. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next item. So if you look at this next item, once I put this up on a screen, and if you're sitting 5 feet back or 10 feet back or 20 feet back, chances are it's going to be really difficult to read. And even looking at it on this screen, it's hard to read. As a matter of fact, it says, if this sentence that is written in bright yellow contained really important information, I would be in trouble. And so just pointing that out, think about, what does this kind of thing, what does this do for accessibility? And this next item is a link to PBS website. And on PBS, there are a bunch of exercises or demonstrations of things to really help people look at, what might it be like to be somebody that is learning or accessing information differently than how you're used to accessing it. And as we're looking at, what does this feel like, one of the things I like to point out to people when they realize that the task that goes along with this particular reading distraction activity, they go through it and they realize, gosh, that was really hard, is also to point out, wait a minute, but think about how you perceive as a teacher, or do you think about, did that change your intelligence level? No. Did that change your anything about your character because you had difficulty reading that? And the answer is no. And so really trying to help people understand that disability does not equate to things that are commonly put out there in maybe media or kind of the myths that go around about what it actually means to have a disability. And so these personalized experiences become really important. And Elise, I don't know, can we click on that? Will it work on this particular?
It should. Let's give it a try.
Okay.
Let me try it in. It might not if I don't have the Flash plug-in here, but let me see. Let me give it a try.
Okay. So as Elise works on that, if this particular, okay, it's working. So your goal is to read this passage and to answer the questions. And it's timed. So, you got to hurry. Get that passage read. Okay, it's time to answer the questions. So the questions are, what was Tom failing to fasten? How many students were in Tom's class? What objects described in the passage have soft sides? And then as they go through this particular exercise, they click on their answers. Most of the time you'll get people saying, well, I couldn't do that. I didn't even get a chance to read that. But the whole point of this activity is to kind of give people a little bit of a paradigm shift on what it might be like if you were a student who had ADHD, or if there were some other challenges that you had that maybe you're not used to thinking about. And so it broadens people's perspectives a little bit. And there's a bunch of other ones on the PBS site that you can access as well that are really interesting and are good for people to think about, and also to just question their assumptions. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So this one, again, goes just to the idea of help people personalize it. So once we're doing these trainings, one of the things that we noticed when we started them is we started out and we started with the big chunk. We started, okay, we're going to do accessibility training, and come learn everything you need to learn, and we're going to just do it all. And we realized very quickly that that doesn't work very well. And so what we started to do instead was look at, well, how are we going to know where people are starting, where they're ending, and what's working, what people need the most help with. And so we started, of course, to do some measurement. And one of the things that has worked the best has just been to do some pre-post measurements and surveys from the feedback on trainings. How do you feel like when you started? Do you feel like you ended? What questions do you have? And what areas do you feel like you need more help? And then the end ultimately is the feedback is looking at what products are being created and are those products meeting the requirements. So if people are creating PowerPoints, are those PowerPoints accessible? If people are creating Word documents, are those Word documents accessible? If they're creating PDFs, are those PDFs accessible? And the PDFs have been a big deal for us because in order to post things on our website, they need to be posted in PDF form. And anybody who's played with PDFs and accessibility has met our friend, the tagging tree. And teaching people about the tagging tree has been one of the more difficult things that we've worked on. But as we've started, we kind of picked out some key questions. And this is an example from a department team. And at the beginning of a training, so before they start any of the different modules that we've created, they go through and complete a survey that is asking them to evaluate themselves on the different components or the different modules that we'll be covering. And all of those items help the person who is doing the trainings within each section to be able to identify, okay, where are areas of strength, areas of weakness, and what can I build on, what do I need to be sure, and hit in a little bit more depth. And it gives us a place to be able to measure progress over time as well. Okay, go ahead and go to the next item. So here's the biggie. These are the lessons that we have learned. And these are just a few of them. We've actually learned probably way more than this list actually indicates. But probably the number one thing that we've learned is that the accessibility trainings can seem really overwhelming, especially for people who haven't thought about it much before. So the number one rule is keep it simple into bite-sized pieces. This became really apparent to me, kind of how I got into this whole realm was because the special ed director in the department I was in asked for a volunteer for somebody to learn about digital accessibility and to learn, what do we need to do? What does it look like? And in my mind, I thought, I don't know anything about that, really. How hard can it be? I'll learn it. I need to learn it, so I'll do it. Naively thinking that it wouldn't be too complex. And what I learned, the more I dove into it, was, wow, I have a lot to learn. But I also learned that if I can learn it, anybody can learn it. And that, I think, has been something that, as we've gone through, I've been able to identify, okay, people are feeling overwhelmed. This is too much information. We need to scale it back, and hit these skills, these ideas in little chunks, a little bit at a time. The next item had to do with using ongoing coaching. So kind of like we know from professional development research, it doesn't work to do a sit and get training. You know, people don't change their practice just from attending a training. The training can provide a good overview, can provide some information, but really what's going to change people's practice is having access to coaching, a way to be able to coach the skills that they're learning and put them into place in the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that became a really important part of what we're doing. And in order to do that, we needed to build capacity within our agency. The third thing, lesson learned, was we needed to be able to locate experts outside of our agency who could answer questions and provide technical assistance while we were developing our capacity within our agency. So looking for and identifying who are the people that we can go ask questions to. We tracked down like Elise and her team. We tracked down Rob at Adobe, who is we call him the accessibility guy, in Seattle, to help us work through PDF questions. And we've just tried to kind of tap people that we could ask questions and figure out answers to things that we just didn't know how to do. And that was a really important thing. The other thing I've talked about is create that public workspace, creating collaborative teams. So this has to do with how do we build this expertise in more than one person, and how do we identify the needs across a broad area, a broad agency. So looking at, you know, what does IT need for the website to be able to work on the website side? What do education specialists need to be able to do the work that education specialists do? What do support staff need to be able to do the communication work that they do? You know, how do all of these people, how do we meet the needs of everybody and do it in a way that makes sense with the least amount of cost and the highest degree of effectiveness? And a key to that has been frequent communication. So the weekly tidbits, just putting things out there on a regular basis makes a big difference. The last item that I want to touch on is we learned that if we wait for perfection, it's not going to happen. That we needed to just dive in and learn lessons as we went. So there's, I think, something to be said for another lesson that we learned, which had to do with looking at our capacity a little bit more closely. But the flip side of that was we didn't know what we didn't know. And we didn't have anybody to help us to know what we didn't know. And so we just dove in and learned as we went. That wasn't maybe the most effective way, and I'll talk about what we would do instead, having gone through it this way. But it was good that we didn't wait for a perfect system and perfect understanding before we began. And same with on the part of our education specialists and other people as they're learning. We don't want them to become perfectly proficient before they try to create an accessible PowerPoint on their own. We want them to try it, and then when they come up with questions, to address those questions and as we go along. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So this is what would we do if we were going to do it differently? And this is based on implementation science, and because it was my slide and I could create it, I put in a quote from my dad that kind of always haunts me a little bit because it's so accurate. But one of the things that he always told me is it's always less expensive to do it right the first time. And so looking at this, how does it apply? There's some great work that was done, and you can find this information through the SysIP site or NERN. And this is talking about how do you implement things effectively. And what we came to see as we were looking back is that we did some of the implementation science things, and other ones we didn't do very well, but we would do it differently if we were going to start out again. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's a tool called the Hexagon tool that is on the NERN website. This is created by Karen Blasi, Kaiser Van Dyke. So on the citations down here at the bottom of the slide, but you can find it if you just search for the Hexagon tool and NERN. But what this tool allows people to do is go through and identify how are you going to use the components of what actually works in implementing innovations or new practices. How are you going to plan things to be able to have the greatest likelihood of implementing something successfully? So, for example, looking at needs, what is our need? Well, our need was to become Section 508 compliant. So that one was easy. The fit, that one also was easy because we were already working on our website. We had the OCR complaint. We had things that were coming into place, so we knew that it fit well. Resources, do we have adequate resources? This one became part of our challenge because we didn't have resources. In our mind, we thought, well, we'll begin and move forward. Looking back, that was one of the areas that we would have established a little bit more clearly and defined what resources do we need, where can we find them, what expertise is out there, how can we access that expertise before we began. The evidence, looking at what other states have done this, what have they done, how have they been successful, what lessons have they learned. So kind of this sort of setting, this information, looking at that information would have been really helpful as well. Readiness, at this point when we began, we weren't quite sure what we didn't know. And so we thought that we were a little bit more ready than we actually were. And this also came about when we actually rolled out our website. So we thought that our website rollout was going to be really smooth, and we had planned and considered everything. And what we discovered was that even though sections and departments had been doing training on creating their accessible materials to go back on the new website, and when people actually realized that that meant by last year, or this past summer, a bit of panic ensued, and people realized how much work that actually meant. And that was a challenge that we didn't anticipate in the original pacing and timing of the project. So looking at some of those items, and then there were some technical glitches and other things that needed to be addressed and kind of pushed the deadlines back, and some of the resources that we had hoped to have posted, we weren't able to post. And so it's still a work in progress, and I imagine that it probably will be, maybe perpetually. But looking at the idea of, yep, we'll get this done, it will be done by this date, was a great goal to set. It just may not have been as realistic as we had thought. And one of the things we could have done to have prevented that would have been to do a little bit more progress monitoring along the way for each of the department sub-web pages and the materials that needed to be on there, to really say, hey, how are you guys doing on creating those materials? And so that's something we would have changed. The last one was looking at the capacity. So at the time we started, we really didn't have capacity. It was the IT department had the most capacity. I had no capacity other than some motivation. And, there were a couple other people as well who were kind of in that same situation. And so we had to learn. And so looking at building that capacity, we have knowledge with the staff with the skills and knowledge. And it would have been a little bit wiser to have built the expert capacity first in the team of training. So you would have trainers in each department already ready to go. Instead of working on training them at the same time, we were working on training everybody else. So those were some of the biggest lessons that we learned. But of all of those, the biggest one was take it in bite-sized chunks, so a little bit at a time. Okay, next slide. The resources that were useful. On our website, or on our intranet, we have a group site where we include items from federal websites, other education entities, materials created within our staff here, checklists that people have created, example documents, things like that. And some of the things that I've shared with everybody who's joined this webinar is an example of a how-to video. That's something we have a series of those. Example tools that people can use, like the color contrast guide. There's also a checklist that goes through and it breaks down the major items that people need to consider in creating accessible documents, and then has some bullet point things that are just kind of highlight things to remember, and then a link for a place within WebAIM's site where they could go and find additional information on that particular item. So for example, if somebody wanted to know about creating meaningful linked text, they could go and do that by either looking at the checklist and saying, okay, here are the items I need to remember. But if they got through that bulleted list and then thought, oh, I need more information, then they could click on the hyperlink to go to WebAIM's site that talks about meaningful linked text, and they could find additional information there. So those are some of the things that we created. Another item that I shared was an example of a training, one of the smaller chunk trainings. This particular one that I shared was about the basics of taking a Word document and saving it as an accessible PDF, and identifying errors that you would have to fix within the source document, and then how to use the Make Accessible tool within Adobe. And that particular training takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and it has the people who are attending that training or coaching session using the practice page that goes with that. And so they're actually working through the items at the same time on their computers. And we found that that works the very best for getting people to get in and really dive in and use things and try things. But by having everybody working from a common practice page, everybody's working through the same questions at the same time, and they can collaborate together to identify what the problems are, find the tools, and you can work through the steps at the same time. Also included were an example of the weekly accessibility advice, little tidbits that we send out, and an LEA newsletter article. So any of those items, feel free to use those for your agency. And then also, if you would like other items, if you'd like any other things that I have in my collection, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to share whatever items would be useful to you. I've got a series of trainings that we've done that cover primarily PowerPoints, Word documents, PDFs, because that's what most of our education specialists use. And so those are the things that we're trying to get people to think about. And then also that information can go to LEAs so that teachers and districts and things, they can start to think about those things as well. So if there are items that you would like to have access to, or if you have questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm happy to share whatever we've got that would be useful for you.
And we'll send out the slides and all of Rebecca's handouts right at the conclusion of this webinar, so that you'll have access to the links that Rebecca shared, as well as all of the handouts that she just mentioned. So if you don't have time to download them all from the webinar window, we'll be sending them out at the end of this webinar as well. And it looks like there may be a question or a comment, so I'm just going to switch. Question, where can we find your how-to videos?
So right now they're on our intranet site. Our goal is to eventually have a link on our state website for accessibility items. That was one of the things that hasn't been created yet. So if you want to email me, then I can send you a link to an Office 360 where you'll be able to, or 365, whatever it is, where you'll be able to access those videos. So we have them stored within a file on Microsoft right now that's on an intranet, but we can make it accessible to people who would like to have access to that as well. So if you'll email me, I can provide that for you.
A few more questions, Rebecca. Somebody wanted to know whether all of your staff have Acrobat Pro in order to make accessible documents.
We use Adobe DC. And it's important on Adobe products that you use the most current version, because they are continually updating the ability of Adobe documents to become accessible documents. Anything prior to 2010, you're going to have a lot of errors that are going to be very difficult to fix. So keep that in mind.
Another question is, how many people did USBE dedicate as a core team to accessibility, and approximately how much of their time was spent on this? Oh, that's a good question.
That's a good question. So the original team had 6 of us, and our agency has, probably 300 people, maybe. And so, and of that original team, it was primarily IT and me and one other education specialist who were looking at how do we kind of build and mold this. And then from that point, now it's morphing kind of out of IT's realm. So IT is really just focused on the website. And now within each section, so the section team members that we're looking at, 8, so about eight people. And the idea on that team, the collaborative team moving forward from here, is that that is a meet quarterly kind of team, so that you can just coordinate what needs to be done, what's going on, how are things going. As far as the original startup, what kind of time did that take? On the IT side, I'm not really sure. I know that the website was a very consuming project, and it still is. And that those 2 people were dedicated, one person entirely to the website, and another person to helping with the accessibility on the website. As far as for my job with the training, accessibility was a part of my responsibilities, but it wasn't the main part of my responsibilities. I probably spent maybe 4 hours a week working on it. And now I currently spend maybe an hour a week, just doing ongoing trainings and updates.
Great. I don't see any additional questions, but I wanted to point everybody to the link in the chat. As Rebecca pointed out, the importance of collecting survey data and getting feedback on trainings. As a federally funded project, we always collect survey data at the end of each webinar so that we can know, sort of what we can improve in the future, as well as additional topics that we may want to consider, or sort of delve deeper into some of these topics that Rebecca addressed today. So if you could please fill out that very short survey at the link in the chat, that would be fantastic. We'll also send out the link again when we send out the slides this afternoon and all of Rebecca's handouts. And feel free to email Rebecca, as she said, or email any of us at CTD if you have additional questions. And yeah, it looks like we got all the questions. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't missed any burning questions. But since we are right at 2 o'clock, 2:01 now, I want to make sure we're respectful of everybody's time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And we will send out an email shortly with all of the handouts and the final slides, and then you can expect a recorded and captioned version of this webinar within the next couple days. So thank you so much, and thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us today and sharing your experience in Utah.
Thanks for letting me come. I appreciate it.